Hello and welcome. You're watching World Panorama, your weekly roundup of all that has happened across the world in one half an hour, and we'll be getting you up to date on all of those events over the next half hour. I'm Ishan Russell, but first let's get you an update as the show is being recorded right now. We'll fill you in on a massive 7.9 magnitude earthquake that has struck east of Pokhara in Nepal. Widespread damage and loss of life was reported from many places in India as well. The first effects were felt in the Kathmandu Valley, where houses, centuries-old temples also collapsed. It was the worst tremor in the Himalayan nation in over 80 years. Photographs posted on social media showed buildings reduced to piles of rubble, large cracks on roads and highways and crowds of people gathering in open spaces. The earthquake had its epicenter near Lamjung, located about 185 kilometers from Kathmandu. The U.S. Geological Survey initially said that the earthquake measured at 7.7, but later upgraded it to a 7.9 magnitude on the Richter scale. It is said the quake hit at 11:56 a.m. local time at a shallow depth of 15 kilometers. There have been a number of casualties. The figures are not confirmed. Initial reports suggest that there have been at least over 100 deaths in Nepal. As of now, that is what the Nepalese government figures are suggesting. Sadly, that number is expected to rise as relief and rescue operations are continuing. We'll tell you about Nepal a little later, but first also let's look at the headlines we're tracking right now. 800 deaths in Mediterranean boat tragedy focuses world attention on plight of migrants and illegal immigration. European Union holds summit to debate solutions. Saudi Arabia's U-turn over Yemen intensifies the conflict there. Violence and airstrikes continue, defeating any hope of settlement between the Houthi rebels and the government. Heads of state adopt key resolutions at the Asia-Africa Summit, resolved to fight global terror and recognize Palestine as an independent state. And U.S. Ambassador Richard Verma announces support to India's leadership on global climate challenges ahead of the Paris summit, where India will declare a commitment to clean energy. Well, a focus story on our World Panorama this week is the tragic boat capsizing in the Mediterranean Sea that claimed over 800 lives, bringing the problem of human trafficking and illegal immigration to the fore once again. Now, in this incident last Saturday night in Libyan waters, the overcrowded vessel went out of control, drowning most of the migrants on board. It has been noted that the number of migrants usually goes up in summers when the poor attempt to flee from African nations. The European Union has decided to bump up its funds by 3 times for rescue operations. The announcement came at the emergency meeting called in Brussels on Thursday to decide on steps to prevent such disasters in the future. But the bloc has also been widely criticized for its policy since the rescue operation Mare Nostrum was ended last year.
We have agreed to triple the resources available to Triton, our border mission in the central Mediterranean, and to enhance its operational capability. The mission will continue to carry out its mandate and respond to distress calls where necessary.
Days after the tragic boat capsize in Libya, the European Union is stepping up rescue efforts for Mediterranean migrants. World leaders decided to destroy vessels used by smugglers and streamline asylum processing and returning failed seekers to where they came from.
Ce qui fera que les moyens budgétaires dédiés à Triton seront portés à 120 millions, ce qui correspond au montant qui fut affecté.
World leaders welcomed the move. Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi said it was a big step forward for Europe. A UN resolution will have to be passed in order to destroy smugglers' ships. Italian Prime Minister sought support from France, UK and Spain for the efforts.
David Cameron, Angela Merkel e François Hollande li abbiamo ricevuti nella delegazione italiana e con loro abbiamo discusso di una serie di questioni. Tra l'altro con Francia e Regno Unito abbiamo chiesto il sostegno per...
But what's emerging is what we need, which is a comprehensive plan going after the criminal gangs, going after the traffickers, going after the owners of the boats, potentially taking action there as well, and stabilizing the countries from which these people are coming.
Wir wollen schnell handeln. Das heißt, wir werden die finanziellen Ressourcen, die für die zuständigen Missionen von Frontex aufgebracht werden, verdreifachen.
Several countries, including France, Britain and Germany, said that they will send ships and helicopters to strengthen Operation Triton, a EU frontier operation of Italy. The triple boost in EU funding of some 120 million euros has been criticized as well. Analysts say it brings back spending up to about the level of Mare Nostrum, an Italian-run search and rescue operation that was cancelled in 2014. A few EU members said Mare Nostrum was too expensive and expressed concerns it was encouraging more migrants. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And Pramit Chaudhuri, Foreign Affairs Editor of the Hindustan Times, joins us in the studio to help us understand this EU migration crisis. I mean, Pramit, where do we start from on this? As far as this problem goes, it's not relatively new. This has been happening for some time, and it's not just limited to what many people would perceive that people from war-torn countries are just trying to migrate into a better environment. It's just also a better quality of life that a lot of people the world over are aspiring to. And so is enough being done to combat this problem? 800 people died last week.
Right. Well, I think the core of the problem is, as you mentioned, that there will always be movement of people from countries that are economically distressed to richer nations. And then there is a small, but not actually all that sizable compared to the larger flow of people who are fleeing war or famine or drought. This has always been happening. It's nothing new. The difference really is that Europe, especially continental Europe, shut its doors to migration about 10 or 15 years ago. It began to reduce its ability to absorb migration. So, for example, the United States is still the largest recipient of legal migration in the world. Canada and Australia are also continue to absorb lots of migrants. Europe stopped a number of years ago, tried to curtail the amount of migration. In 1970s and 60s, for example, millions of people migrated to Europe. The Turks migrated to Germany, Africans migrated to Spain, Italy, and France, Indians migrated to Britain. And then from about the 1980s and 1990s onward, Europe began to close the doors. And this is the core of the problem. Why doesn't this happen in the United States? Because if I'm a migrant to the United States, I have a legal means to go there. And America still absorbs millions of migrants every year, and it doesn't have a problem with this. Europe, as its economy began to slow down and shrink, and as the EU became more and more dominated by became more and more difficult for the EU to have a common policy, because it took only one country to say, well, I'm not accepting migrants, and then all of the EU got frozen. It became the only means to go to the EU, increasingly became the illegal migrant, which is why you now have this. But once you go on the illegal track, then it's traffickers or desperate actions as taking the boats, leaky boats, and then trying to sail and cross in the middle of the night. And that's when the tragedies start to happen. Because if you don't have a legal migratory pathway, then the illegal pathway automatically leads itself to both exploitation and tragedy.
Yes, in fact, Britain, the UK gave the argument of not joining this EU, not joining up with Italy in combating this problem last year when they cut down on their involvement in this. And that was the reason that was given, that it would be a pullback factor, that it would attract more people to that
in the wrong direction.
In the wrong direction.
Absolutely.
So as far as it also shows a lot of fissures within the EU as far as immigration itself is concerned.
Yes.
Italy is sending out boats and has been doing efforts, but the other EU countries have not really played ball on immigration.
Well, obviously the southern Mediterranean countries, Spain, Italy, until now Greece, but Greece is in such chaos that it can't actually do anything, have been at the core of the maritime activities on the Mediterranean. But realize that a lot of the so-called rehabilitation and humanitarian action is actually designed to stop the refugees from coming. What they do is they do patrol, they try to push the boats back, and when they do capture a boat, they send them off to some small island somewhere, hold them in a camp, and then send them back to the countries that they come from. And this is basically continues to be EU policy. It's not a solution in terms of trying to find a legal means for them to come. It's now become simply an issue of how do you find a means to stop them in a manner that doesn't get the media attention, is basically what it comes down to. And politically, though, the core problem remains in Europe is that anti-immigration sentiment is now so strong because of the condition of the economy, and on another subtext of that is concerns about Islamic terror after the Charlie Hebdo incident in Paris and so on. There's a lot of combination of anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim sentiment fusing together. So the result is that anti-immigrant parties now are number 3 or number 4 political forces across many countries in Europe. So recently, for example, the Finn party became an anti-immigrant party, became the number 2 party in Finland of all countries, where you hardly think any immigrants ever make it. But that has risen in France. You have Marine Le Pen. You have in Germany, there's the Alternative for Germany party that's arisen. And even in Britain, you have the UK Independent Party, which has now risen as a 3rd or 4th political party. So this has changed the dynamic. So a lot of the regular mainstream parties in Europe are now scared to take on a pro-immigrant position because they're scared that this is now leading to a working class revolt against them. And at the heart of this, as I say again, is the fact that Europe's economy is slowing down and employment has been stagnant now for almost a decade.
All right. So in terms of solution, I mean, we've talked about the short-term measures that the EU has taken, from tripling the budget, so it was more boats being out there for relief and rescue operations. But in terms of tackling the problem from a longer-term perspective, because this kind of a situation can lead to almost it would be an extreme scenario, but a clash of civilizations sort of scenario.
Well, I think, yes. I think ultimately the real core of the problem is for Europe to solve its economic issues. If there's employment and jobs being created across the board, the anti-immigrant sentiment automatically drops off. And therefore, then the governments there are in a position to begin to at least allow legal migration of some variety to happen, at which point you'll get at least less people trying to... I mean, ultimately, if you're a migrant, an illegal migrant, you don't want to take the illegal path if you can go onto a legal path, which is much more sensible, where you just have to do an interview, fill out forms, and hopefully you'll get through. A lot of the people who go onto the illegal migrant actually pay huge sums of money. They pay, maybe if an Indian illegal migrant who goes to Canada or Europe, traffickers often charge several 100,000 rupees to go there. It's actually cheaper for them to go by the legal migrant path, where you just have to pay for an airplane ticket and a lawyer, perhaps. So they would much prefer that. So you need to get that legal path of migration. And right now, as I said, Europe has shut the doors on that. And that has now made it almost means that all of the migrants, especially from Africa and the Middle East, are all going via the illegal path. And that's what they need to be looking at as the real solution to this. But as you said, right now they're spending a lot of money, but all of that money is really about methods to stop the migrants from coming in by boat, or to stop the boats and take the migrants and take them to another island and keep them. I should add, Australia recently had an illegal migrant problem with boatloads of Sri Lankans and Afghans suddenly popping up on their shores. But at least they have a very large legal migratory pathway and door. A lot of Indians go via that route.
All right, so very quickly, in terms of, while we spoke about the larger illegal trafficking problem, the problems that are happening, for example, in Libya, or for that matter in Yemen, do you think that they could increase the problem, increase the inflow of people, of migrants trying to make an attempt?
Well, Yemen is still a long while to go. Libya definitely has seen the result. You see, part of the result is not so much as that we don't see much evidence yet of the number of Libyans leaving. Libya itself has a very tiny population. What's really happened is that Libya as a nation has disintegrated, right? It doesn't really have a functional government, and it's just now a bunch of warlords and tribal militias. So Libya no longer controls its own shoreline. The result is that it's much easier to traffic. If I'm a trafficker, I go there and I go to the warlord and say, let me pass a few hundred people here every year, and I'll give you 10% of the money. And the Libyan warlord is, yeah, go ahead, I don't care. What do I care as long as I get a little money out of this? The result is that in the past, what would happen is that the Europeans or country would strike a deal with Libya or an African government and say, you control the migrants and you're coming from your and I'll give you, let's say, amount of foreign aid, I'll give you a project, I'll give you some money and I'll give you some assistance, or I'll allow a small group of people from your country on a legal migratory path, often be the members of the elite, the children of the elite. Now you can't even do that because there's no government to talk to.
All right.
Right?
So, in that sense, this problem is, we're going to be talking about it for some time.
Oh,
now.
absolutely,
It's not going to
go away.
Yeah, it's not going to, and nobody can wish it away. It's rather sad, though. Over 800 people died last week. Thank you very much, Pramit Chaudhuri, for coming in and helping us understand this issue a little better.
Thank you.
All right, we move on to Yemen, where violence and airstrikes continue in that country, despite Saudi Arabia's announcement on Tuesday that it was ending its initial air campaign. Saudis and the Houthi rebels are talking publicly about the need to move on from the conflict, but it still remains unclear if they can reach any kind of agreement.
The deafening sounds of bombing across Yemen's cities, signaling that the war is nowhere near its end. Despite Saudi Arabia announcing on Tuesday that it was ending its initial air campaign, airstrikes targeted Houthi-held positions in Ib, Lahij, Marib, Taiz, among others. Fighting between Houthi rebels and forces loyal to President Hadi also intensified in the flashpoint city of Aden.
So now we enter a new phase where the objective of this new phase is to continue to protect the civilians in Yemen from takeover by the Houthis, to counter any aggressive moves by the Houthis in Yemen, and to work on enhancing the flow of humanitarian assistance to Yemen and ease the work of international humanitarian organizations in Yemen.
The intense fighting prevented peace talks from starting. Houthis say they will participate only after the airstrikes stop completely, while the government says Houthis must lay down arms first. Previous talks between the rebels and the government of Yemeni President Hadi failed in January after rebels attacked presidential palace in Sana'a.
لا يوجد أي تواصل في الوقت الحاضر. ما يقوم به الميليشيات الحوثية وميليشيات علي عبد الله صالح هو جريمة في حق الشعب اليمني كله. لا يوجد هناك أي تواصل حتى يلقوا بالسلاح ويستسلموا.
The 4 weeks of military campaign has already caused hundreds of civilian casualties in Yemen. Much of the country's creaking infrastructure, including its health services, has collapsed. A humanitarian crisis continues to unfold as the Houthis' demands for a major say in any government of national unity seem unlikely to be met by their Saudi-backed opponents. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, we'll slip into a very quick break right now, but coming up on the other side, we'll get you details of Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Pakistan. More on that on the other side. Welcome back. You're watching World Panorama. Now, representing the voices of the Asian and African people, heads of states of about 30 nations adopted 3 key resolutions at the Asia-Africa Summit in Indonesian capital Jakarta on Thursday. Fighting global terror, strengthening multilateral relationships, and recognition of Palestine as an independent state were thrust areas. Here's more.
Linking Asia and Africa, strengthening economic and strategic ties and mutual development were the focus of the 2-day Asia-Africa Summit held in Jakarta this week. Leaders of 30 nations attended. The meet commemorated the 60th anniversary of the establishment of the non-aligned group of nations. Indonesian President Joko Widodo joined leaders in calling for a new global order open to emerging economic powers and shedding of obsolete ideas.
Suara-suara kebangkitan bangsa-bangsa Asia Afrika. Oleh sebab itu, suara dan keputusan kita tidak dapat diabaikan oleh siapapun.
After a string of detailed parleys, one consensus that emerged was the need to stand together against the domination of certain nations and avoid global imbalances. The summit ended on Thursday endorsing 3 documents: the Bandung Message to strengthen South-South cooperation, the Declaration on reinvigorating the new Asian-African strategic partnership, and the Declaration on Palestine.
Persetujuan yang mulia, ketiga dokumen ini akan kita sahkan sebagai hasil dari Konferensi Asia Afrika 2015. Ketiga dokumen hasil konferensi saya sahkan.
External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj, who represented India at the conference, urged concerted efforts to fight organized crime and global terror.
The rise of extremist violence and terrorism has been one of the most disturbing security phenomena, and several parts of our 2 continents are victim to a medley of terrorist groups. ISIS, has emerged as a cause of grave concern in the last year. We must be resolute in countering this scourge that challenges our civilization.
Sushma Swaraj also called for enhanced capacity-building initiatives and development of education and skill between nations of two continents, underlining once again the immense potential of South-South cooperation. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
Now, India is being closely watched on its intended contribution towards the global response to climate change. US Ambassador to India, Ravi Richard Verma, made these remarks in New Delhi last week. They hold a major significance ahead of the crucial climate change negotiations slated for December in Paris, where India will declare its commitment to clean energy.
A pat on the back from the US on India's initiatives to mitigating the effects of climate change. US Ambassador to India Richard Verma asserted that India's robust economic growth forecasts and significant greenhouse gas emissions have seized global attention, alongside its intended participation in moderating climate change. With two back-to-back historic visits by the Indian and American leadership in less than 6 months, Verma said that the US is keen to step up climate change cooperation with India.
We want to share our best technology and our best practices with Indian companies. I think that's definitely the goal and the aspiration, and that's what we're working towards.
Richard Verma also spoke of measures initiated by the US to take on the climate change challenge.
We accept our role that we've played, but we also accept the leadership role that we've played over the last 3 and 4 decades. We are a major industrialized country that has been emitting large amounts of greenhouse gases for many decades. And so there's absolutely no denial of that reality by President Obama, and certainly not for me personally or the Secretary of State.
The US ambassador's remarks assume significance ahead of crucial climate change negotiations in Paris in December this year. In terms of emissions, India ranks 4th after China, US and the EU. Each will submit their intended nationally determined contributions, declarations that will be an articulation of commitment to adopt clean energy. Kriti Mishra, Rajya Sabha TV.
On a high-profile visit to Pakistan, Chinese President Xi Jinping embarked on what was described as a fate-changing visit to Pakistan. He put on the table $46 billion as aid for the country. Both countries have signed 51 agreements. One of the key emphasis is to revive Pakistan's ailing energy sector. The two countries signed deals on cooperation in gas, coal and solar energy projects to provide 16,400 megawatts of electricity, roughly equivalent to the country's entire current capacity. Another key focus is the China-Pakistan economic corridor that passes through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Notably, the aid was on a scale that the United States never offered Pakistan in the past decade of a close relationship, which has led to experts predicting a decline of US influence in the country. And much else has been unfolding across the globe, so let's get you up to date with all the other international news in our segment Global Watch.
Former Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi was sentenced to 20 years in prison by an Egyptian court on Tuesday. Morsi, along with a dozen leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood, were convicted of inciting violence and directing illegal detentions and torture. The charges stemmed from a night of bloody street fighting between Morsi's supporters and opponents outside the presidential palace in December 2012. The ruling is the first against Morsi, who said he is determined to reverse what he calls a military coup in 2013, staged by then Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Former US military commander and CIA director David Petraeus was sentenced to serve 2 years in probation and to pay a fine of $100,000 on Thursday for sharing classified information with his biographer Paula Broadwell, with whom he was having an affair. Prosecutors agreed not to send Petraeus, once a widely celebrated military leader, to jail, as the classified information was never released to the public. Petraeus resigned as CIA director in November 2012 after his relationship with Paula Broadwell became public. Armenia marked the 100th anniversary of the World War I killings of Armenians by Ottoman Turks on Friday. A ceremony was attended by delegations that included the presidents of France, Russia, Serbia and Cyprus. Thousands of people marched the streets of Brussels to commemorate the day, which Armenia refers to as the Turkish genocide of up to 1.5 million Armenians in 1915 by the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Turkey, however, calls it a lie and a plot to cause a split in the Middle East. Talks on Iran nuclear issue resumed in Vienna on Thursday. A bilateral meeting between EU representative and Iran Deputy Foreign Minister Arakchi was held on the first day of resumption of talks. Iran and the six world powers are negotiating the details of the tentative deal reached on the 2nd of April. The timing and scope of sanctions relief remain major sticking points in talks. Iran said all sanctions must be lifted simultaneously for any nuclear deal to take effect. The United States has made it clear that sanctions on Iran would have to be phased out gradually under the final pact. Talks between Iran and the six powers, including US Under-Secretary Wendy Sherman, will follow in the coming week. Volcano Calbuco in southern Chile erupted for the first time in more than 4 decades on Wednesday, covering the city with thick plume of ash and smoke. More than 4,000 people were evacuated. At least a dozen international flights were cancelled or delayed, causing massive inconvenience to passengers. The density of ash is expected to increase in the coming days. The volcano last had a major eruption in 1961.
Well, shifting gears now, time to bring you up to speed with all the sports news that you might have missed this week. Here's all the sports action.
World number 1 Novak Djokovic clinched his second Monte Carlo title with a 3-set victory over Thomas Berdych. The Serb came through 7-5, 4-6, 6-3 to extend his winning run to 17 matches in 2015. With this, Djokovic became the first man to win the opening 3 Masters events. Bayern Munich manager Pep Guardiola will return to face his former club Barcelona after the two teams were drawn against each other in the Champions League semi-final. Real Madrid will face Juventus in the other semi-final. The first legs will be played on 5th and 6th of May, and the return legs will be played on May 12th and 13th. Formula 1 champion Lewis Hamilton sits comfortably atop the 2015 Sunday Times Sports Rich list. With a fortune of £88 million, Hamilton is still the richest sportsman in Britain. His wealth has increased by £20 million since last year. Manchester United and England's captain Wayne Rooney is second with a sum of £72 million, overtaking Jenson Button this year. Tennis player Andy Murray is now fourth with amassed earnings valued at €48 million.
Well, that's all in World Panorama this week, but we'll be back next week with another edition, so do stay tuned.